11:35 p.m. on August 24, 2024, gunfire cracked across 234th Street in Carson, pulling deputies toward two separate scenes less than 900 feet apart. On West 234th, one man lay dying in the roadway, while another sat slumped inside a vehicle that had rolled across Main Street and crashed into a wall. Family members rushed toward both crime scenes before investigators had even sorted out who fired first or why the shooting spread across both sides of the block. What looked like one late-night confrontation would soon pull detectives into a much older family story, one that some people traced back 25 years. To understand why two bodies ended up on opposite sides of the same street, you have to understand how Carson's neighborhood lines work. Main Street cuts through the 234th Street corridor, creating a narrow border where West 234th and East 234th can carry completely different street associations. Local accounts have long connected nearby territory with Nightcrawlers 13, Carson 13, Scott Park Peru, plus other sets packed into Carson's tight residential grid. That geography matters, since ordinary movements can be read differently when old rivalries, family ties, graffiti, or parked vehicles carry neighborhood meaning. A person can cross less than 1,000 feet past one major road, then enter a space claimed or remembered by somebody else. Folks outside Carson might see one quiet residential strip, but locals have long treated those short distances like hard boundaries with serious consequences. On this particular Saturday night, Richard Mata was driving near a place he knew well. Although years had passed since Carson shaped his earlier life, Richard Mata grew up in Carson, then spent time living in Arizona before recently moving back toward the neighborhood where his family still had roots. Relatives describe him as a hard-working family man who enjoyed fishing, while a funeral fundraiser remembered him as a son, brother, uncle, godfather, friend, and devoted father. His three children, Selena, Isaiah, and Stella, were named by the family as his most precious gift, which framed him as somebody carrying real responsibilities. That settled image became harder to understand once homicide investigators began reconstructing what happened near Main Street during those final minutes. Richard had returned from Arizona, built a family life, and apparently moved through Carson as somebody older than the young men usually associated with street confrontations. Still, detectives developed a working theory that placed him inside his own vehicle when the first shots were fired towards someone standing nearby. That account did not erase how relatives remembered him, but it opened a different question about what pulled a father of three into deadly gunfire. The man found near Richard's crashed vehicle was not the only person whose story complicated the scene, since another family was gathering across the same corridor. Less than 900 feet away, deputies had located an 18-year-old whose life had already been shaped by a medical struggle before violence reached him. His name was Mativa, often called Va, and he lived in Gardena, even though he was standing on 234th Street that night. Richard's past raised one set of questions, while Va's age and condition made the other side feel even harder to process. Mativa had recently received a kidney transplant after spending part of his adolescence on dialysis, giving him a fresh chance at ordinary young adulthood. His father described him as respectful, loving, and full of life, which made the timing of his death especially cruel for everyone gathering nearby. Va had survived years of treatment, waded through serious health problems, then reached a point where his future appeared to be opening again. Instead, he was pronounced dead on a residential street after gunfire connected his name forever with Richard Mata's final drive. Investigators concluded that Richard Mata fired the shots that struck Mativa, before gunfire came back in the opposite direction during the confrontation. Moments later, Richard lost control of his vehicle, crossed Main Street, and crashed after suffering the wounds that would ultimately take his life. 3 days after the shooting, detectives arrested Raymond Mayos, placing him at the center of an investigation that already involved two grieving families connected by one violent night. As authorities worked through witness statements, forensic evidence, and the sequence of events stretching across both sides of 234th Street, relatives of Richard and Va were left waiting for answers about how a confrontation lasting only moments had ended with two young lives lost along the same divided block. To understand why Richard Mata's 2024 death carried such heavy meaning online, the story has to rewind 25 years to Carson in 1999. According to the account later circulated online, Richard's younger sister was Sasha Tatiana Ma, born on July 1st, 1981. Their father reportedly died shortly after Sasha's birth, leaving their mother to raise several children while keeping the family together. Sasha remained close with her siblings, although the neighborhood surrounding them was already shaped by territorial disputes involving several local street groups. People supposedly called her Hollywood, a nickname tied to her leopard print purses, small heels, fancy hats, and habit of dressing up for simple errands. While other teenagers focused on the block around them, Sasha reportedly imagined replacing Carson's working-class streets with fashion studios and larger opportunities. Her mother encouraged her to avoid neighborhood relationships, finish school, attend college, and eventually meet people living beyond the local street environment. Still, Sasha dropped out after her sophomore year following complaints about her clothing, then considered fashion design, dental hygiene, and professional modeling. The same account claims Sasha appeared in a car-oriented magazine, visited local modeling agencies, and worked inside a sporting goods store at a nearby mall. Those steps had not yet produced a major career, yet they showed a teenager actively trying different routes toward the future she pictured. Her social life also expanded during that period, with nights spent around friends, sisters, local parties, and young people connected across Carson. Her mother reportedly warned that dangerous company could bring trouble to her doorstep, even when Sasha herself was not searching for conflict. During the early hours of November 13, 1999, Sasha allegedly returned from Torrance after spending the night partying with sisters and friends. Their group parked outside her family home while the engine remained running, creating an ordinary end to a late teenage night. Before everyone could leave the vehicle, another car reportedly approached and slowed near the house with somebody already holding a firearm. A heavy-set man described in the later narration as Samoan allegedly extended his arm through the window and fired repeatedly. Bullets tore through the occupied vehicle, striking two young women while Sasha absorbed a round directly into her chest. She remained inside the driver's seat as relatives rushed outside, with her mother reportedly trying desperately to keep her breathing. The only male passenger, described as a gang member from another Carson area, escaped without being wounded and left the scene. Sasha died at 18, leaving her modeling plans unfinished, while her family tried understanding why their home had become a shooting location. That single detail about the unharmed male passenger later created one of the story's biggest questions, since narrators suggested he may have been targeted. Under that version, Sasha and the wounded women were trapped inside somebody else's street dispute when the gunman opened fire. Her family reportedly believed the shooting connected with ongoing hostility involving local Samoan Peru members and groups linked through Sasha's relatives. Afterward, her mother allegedly requested police assistance arranging a truce, hoping another shooting would not answer the one that killed her daughter. Her request placed her in a painful position, since she was grieving while trying to stop relatives or neighborhood associates from seeking retaliation. Richard's reaction was never documented through a verifiable interview, although the later story linked him personally to the anger surrounding Sasha's death. It identified him by the nickname Creeper while connecting him with Nightcrawler's 13, whose disputes allegedly involved Scott Park Peru and other Carson groups. That alleged connection would later become central to claims that the family's 1999 loss somehow returned during Richard's final night in 2024. For years, people around Carson quietly repeated the story of Sasha Ma, an 18-year-old with dreams that reached far beyond the neighborhood where she grew up. Friends remembered a young woman chasing modeling opportunities, while her family saw someone determined to build a different future despite growing up around long-standing street rivalries. Then, after a late night out with her sisters and friends, everything changed when gunfire erupted outside her own home, leaving Sasha dead inside the driver's seat before her life had truly begun. Her death quickly became one of those stories that never completely disappeared, even as the years kept moving forward. As time passed, neighbors, relatives, and people familiar with Carson connected her killing to broader tensions already shaping the streets around Main Street and nearby neighborhoods. Stories circulated that the shooting may have centered on someone else inside the vehicle, while others believed old neighborhood rivalries had reached another devastating turning point. Richard Mata's name eventually became woven into those conversations, with many believing Sasha's death left emotional wounds that followed her family long after the funeral ended. Whether discussed at family gatherings, neighborhood conversations, or later across social media, the tragedy continued resurfacing whenever Carson's history of violence came up. That lingering memory became impossible to ignore 25 years later when Richard Mata was killed only a short distance from where another chapter of Carson's violence unfolded. The similarities between both stories drew immediate attention, placing one family's losses across two generations into the same conversation. What began with Sasha's final night in 1999 now seemed to echo through Richard's last moments in 2024, creating a heartbreaking narrative that many people believed connected two separate tragedies across the same city and the same streets. According to that same account, Richard carried the street name Creeper during an earlier period connected with Nightcrawler's 13 around Carson. Whether his sister's death pushed him deeper into neighborhood conflict remains unclear, since no verified source documents his actions immediately after November 1999. What is established is that Richard eventually left California, settled in Arizona, created a family, and raised 3 children named Selena, Isaiah, and Stella. Relatives later remember a hard-working fisherman rather than somebody actively living through old territorial disputes. Years away likely created distance from Carson's neighborhood lines, although distance did not remove his family history or erase what people remembered about him. By 2024, Richard had returned to the city where he grew up, placing him near relatives, familiar streets, and the Main Street boundary. Nothing publicly available explains why he came back, how long he planned staying, or whether old relationships remained active after Arizona. Still, once he drove near 234th Street on August 24th, his settled family identity collided with allegations surrounding a life he supposedly left behind. That collision would eventually place Richard Fatu Mativa and Raymond Mayos inside one case involving gunfire on opposite sides of Main Street. Yet, before investigators could describe who fired first, people online had already connected Richard's death with Sasha's killing 25 years earlier. The link sounded almost too exact, especially with both stories involving Carson, rival groups, sudden gunfire, and the same grieving family. What actually happened during Richard's final minutes would soon make that old account spread much further than it ever had before. By 11:35 p.m. on August 24, 2024, Richard Mata was driving near the 234th Street corridor, only a short distance from his Carson home. Fatu Mativa was standing near Main Street, while 22-year-old Raymond Mayos was also present somewhere within that same confrontation. Deputies later received gunfire calls from West 234th Street and East 234th Street almost simultaneously, placing both shooting scenes less than 900 feet apart. Richard's vehicle then rolled across the dividing road, struck a parked vehicle or nearby structure, and stopped after he had already suffered a fatal gunshot wound. Investigators eventually developed a reconstruction that differs sharply from the first public impression of two unrelated men being attacked on opposite sides of one block. LASD Lieutenant Stephen DeYoung said detectives believed Richard fired from his vehicle toward Valle, who was standing nearby when the bullet struck him. Under that working theory, somebody around Valle returned fire, hitting Richard before his uncontrolled vehicle crossed Main Street and crashed. Deputies arriving on West 234th found one victim down on the roadway, while officers on East 234th discovered the second man inside the damaged vehicle. Richard Mata's final moments became even more intense as accounts of the shooting described a confrontation unfolding near the Main Street neighborhood boundary. According to those accounts, Richard encountered Fatu Mativa, also known as Boy Rue, shortly before gunfire erupted in the area. The confrontation reportedly escalated within seconds, with Richard opening fire before another man, Raymond Mayos, allegedly returned shots during the exchange. By the time everything stopped, Richard's vehicle had crossed Main Street, crashed nearby, Va had collapsed where he was struck, and the entire block was flooded with deputies, flashing patrol lights, crime scene tape, and grieving relatives trying to understand how an ordinary late summer night had turned into another deadly chapter in Carson's history. Va'a's death carried another heavy layer, since the 18-year-old had only recently received a kidney transplant following a long period on dialysis. His father told reporters that his son was respectful, loving, and full of life, while Richard's relatives remember a hard-working fisherman devoted to Selena, Isaiah, and Stella. Those family portraits did not explain why gunfire erupted, although they showed how each scene contained more than street affiliations or police theories. Two households were now grieving, yet detectives still lacked a publicly detailed account of the first words, movements, or decisions that triggered everything. On Tuesday, August 27th, homicide detectives arrested Raymond Mayos in connection with the double shooting, giving investigators their first publicly identified suspect. Lieutenant DeYoung confirmed the arrest through reporting cited by the Daily Breeze, although the sheriff's department released little additional information afterward. No widely reported filing described Raymond's charges, plea, court schedule, trial, or final case outcome, leaving his exact legal position unresolved. That silence created a strange ending where the public knew his name, age, and arrest date, but almost nothing about what prosecutors believed they could prove. The missing court trail also prevented Rich's family from receiving a clean public explanation about how their relative became both victim and suspected shooter. His fundraiser described a loving father whose children represented his greatest gift, while the investigative theory placed him behind the weapon that killed Va'a. Va'a's relatives faced the opposite conflict, mourning a medically vulnerable teenager, while online narrators assigned him a street identity that officials never confirmed. With no complete prosecution record available, each family was left carrying fragments assembled from witnesses, news coverage, detective statements, and neighborhood speculation. As Richard Mata's death spread through Carson, many people immediately connected it to the loss of his sister, Sasha Ma, 25 years earlier. According to the story that circulated throughout the community, Sasha was killed during a drive-by shooting in 1999 that grew out of neighborhood tensions already dividing parts of the city. Richard's death on August 24, 2024 appeared to follow another violent encounter near Main Street, where Fatu Mativa lost his life and Raymond Mayos was later arrested. Those familiar names, the same Carson streets, plus another grieving Mata family, made the two tragedies feel deeply connected. People pointed to the similarities almost immediately. One sibling died as a teenager with dreams beyond the neighborhood, while another lost his life after returning to Carson years later following time in Arizona. Both stories centered on sudden gunfire, devastated relatives, and violence unfolding around the same community. Whether every detail unfolded exactly as many people believed may never be fully known, yet the parallels were powerful enough that countless residents came to see Richard's final night as another chapter in a family tragedy that seemed to stretch across an entire generation. Richard Mata and Fatu Mativa joined a longer list of Carson families whose ordinary gatherings suddenly turned into deadly crime scenes. In December 2019, 19-year-old Aaron Lavender sat inside a vehicle outside a Carson residence alongside 17-year-old Dalalaya Hearn and 3 other people. 2 attackers walked toward the parked car before opening fire, striking both young women badly enough that neither survived after reaching the hospital. Lavender played softball at Compton College, while Hearn was a high school student preparing to begin college, yet somebody still brought gunfire directly toward them. The location carried an even darker history, since that same residence had hosted a vigil earlier that week for a 26-year-old resident who recently died. What started as another gathering shaped by grief became a second killing scene, leaving Carson officials and County Supervisor Mark Ridley Thomas offering a $30,000 reward. Their deaths were never publicly tied to Richard Valle, Nightcrawler's 13, Scott Park Pyru, or Sasha Ma's disputed 1999 story. Still, the mechanics felt painfully familiar, with young people sitting inside a vehicle before approaching gunmen transformed one residential block into another memorial. 3 years earlier, Jordan Love and his mother, Michelle Kelly Love, were sitting inside a car outside their Tillman Avenue home during February 2016. Jordan, a 27-year-old music producer known professionally as Jorgiano, was beside his 54-year-old mother when gunmen opened fire into their vehicle. His grandmother survived without being struck, while Jordan's father reached his wounded son and later told reporters that Jordan died inside his arms. Michelle also died from the attack, leaving the Love family without arrest, courtroom testimony, or a publicly identified motive. 5 years later, relatives returned to release balloons for Jordan and Michelle, while their double homicide remained unresolved despite the passing time. Their case carried no confirmed connection to 234th Street, yet it reflected the same Carson pattern surrounding Sasha, Richard, Va'a, Aaron, and Dalalaya. Vehicles became traps, homes became backdrops, relatives became witnesses, while answers often disappeared once detectives exhausted whatever evidence remained at those scenes. For Richard's children, Selena, Isaiah, and Stella, the arguments surrounding street affiliations could never replace the father their relatives described as hardworking and devoted. Doreen Arig organized funeral support while identifying Richard as a son, brother, uncle, godfather, friend, plus a parent whose children were his greatest treasure. His sister remembered someone who enjoyed fishing, although investigators also believed he fired the shots that killed 18-year-old Va'a before return gunfire ended his life. That contradiction left relatives mourning a loved one while outsiders debated actions that were never fully explained through a public trial. The Mata family never stopped carrying Sasha's memory after losing her in 1999, and 25 years later, they faced another devastating tragedy when Richard was killed on 234th Street. Their mother had once watched Sasha die inside the driver's seat. Then later relatives gathered around Richard's body under another set of flashing patrol lights. Whatever the full story behind both shootings, one family endured the heartbreaking loss of 2 siblings a quarter century apart. That brings the story back to 11:35 p.m. on August 24, 2024, when deputies found 2 dead men across Main Street. Investigators documented Richard Mata, Fatu Mativa, Raymond Maozi's arrest, the crashed vehicle, and 2 connected scenes along East and West 234th Street. What they never publicly completed was the full sequence, motive, prosecution outcome, or any verified connection between Richard's death and Sasha's alleged 1999 killing. Once the tape disappeared, Carson kept the same divided streets, while the Mata and Mativa families carried questions no cleared roadway could remove.